Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Brian Henderson, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Association of Welcoming and Affirming Baptists. And so on behalf of our staff and our board, I want to welcome all of you into this webinar this evening, Trans and Terrified. In many ways, to be honest, AWAB would wish that if this was the world that we hope to see one day, that a webinar like this would not be necessary. And yet the reality is, we know in this point in time that it is. And so we are honored and privileged to be able to share with you tonight as we will. It is an honor for me to be able to introduce the Reverends Erica Saunders and Donnie Anderson as together they help us facilitate a conversation around matters that are so important and that are matters of the heart, that are matters of faith, that are matters of life. And so without further ado, I want to hand things over to the two of them as they graciously lead us as they will. Again, welcome to all of you.
Thank you, Brian. We're so delighted to be here tonight. Erica and I look forward to sharing with you some information and then answering your questions to the best of our ability. I want to say a special thanks to Kurt Kaufman tonight, who is behind the scenes making all the technology work, because if we were doing this with my technological skills, we'd all have a pen and paper and be drawing stick people. So thank you so much for your help. This is a huge subject, and tonight we're just going to broach a very small part of what trans and terrified means in the United States today. We will focus on two things. First of all, we've decided to focus specifically on the issues of legislation related to young people and minors. There's so much to this topic, but in this amount of time, it's going to be a challenge to even handle that in a responsible way. And the other reason we have want to focus on this is the fact that this particular area is the most or the least understood and the most dangerous. And we'll talk about that as we go through our time. Little disclaimer, Erica and I are pastors advocates. We're not lawyers nor medical or mental health professionals. This is our perspective, but it is a perspective from lived experience. And we think that's important for all of you to understand. I also want to just say that the views expressed during this webinar, especially the views that I bring forward, may not necessarily be the views of AWAB. I may go a little further than some of our AWAB folks. So just want to make sure that we're clear about that. So what is with all of this legislation that's going on that affects young people across our country? There are a number of pieces of legislation in excess of 130 this last year that were introduced in state houses across America. What does this legislation intend to do? First, its intent is to deny trans health care to minors. That is the goal. Okay, please understand as you look at these, it is to deny health care to minors. Second, and not always true in all of this legislation, but this is trending, and that is in addition to denying health care, but to also deny insurance for that care. Now, many people don't fully understand Medicare and Medicaid. Medicare is primarily for old people like me. Medicaid is a federally funded, state administered program that provides medical insurance for people who are at the lower end of the economic spectrum. States, because they administer Medicaid, have the option of developing rules around that Medicaid that will vary from state to state. And so there is a move going on across the country to have Medicaid not provide health insurance for transgender healthcare, not only for minors, but for all transgender individuals. This includes medical care as well as mental health. So realize that there really are generically two focus things here. One is to deny healthcare to minors. The other is another strategy to deny healthcare, trans healthcare, to all people in the transgender community. How does it work? Well, it varies from state to state, but here's some basic parts of these laws. One approach is to simply ban all transgender healthcare, and that no matter what age someone is, it's banned. The targets of the punishments here are the healthcare and mental health providers. This would do everything from deny licenses to fines to even putting people in jail for providing healthcare to transgender individuals. The second approach is to require parental permission for minors to have transgender healthcare. There's a lot of talk in these bills about parental rights. First of all, let me say this. Parental rights are not, never have been, absolute rights. You do not have the right as a parent to abuse your child. The courts are filled with cases about people for religious reasons who have tried to deny health care to their children because they believe God will take care of it. It's a very complicated area of law, which we certainly aren't even going to try to go into, but just realize that parental rights are not and never have been absolute. The targets of this kind of approach are healthcare providers, teachers, librarians, pastors, youth workers, anyone working with children. And what they're basically saying is if you are a teacher, you could lose your job. If you work in the cafeteria and a student talks to you and you back off, you could lose your job. Who knows what could happen in terms of pastors and others. So they're trying to regulate who can talk to children. The last thing I want to say in this introduction is this. If you work with children in any way, shape, or form, in any shape or way, you have an ethical dilemma coming your way. As a teacher, what's most important, your job or honoring the health of that child? As a pastor, lots of examples, but we don't have time. We are going to go to a third source. We have a brief video from CBS News that will begin to introduce us to the broader question. We didn't want you to rely just on us, but we wanted an outside source. So Kurt, if you could please run the video.
In state houses across the country this year, lawmakers have pushed bills restricting or outright banning gender-affirming care for transgender minors. So far, 17 states have enacted some of those laws and are considering similar bills. The wave of legislation targeting transgender youth is no coincidence, and it didn't come from grassroots organizations or from constituents. The Associated Press analyzed the language in more than 130 such bills and found many are similar or even identical to model legislation written by special interest groups. Jeff McMillan joins me now. He's an editor and writer for the Associated Press and worked on the investigation about this legislation. Thanks so much for being with us. I guess I'd like to ask you to begin with, to give us some sense of the process. Big job. How did you analyze these new bills, and how did you sort of track down the sources of the legislation?
Thank you. Yes, it was a big process. In order to do it correctly and effectively, we had to narrow our focus a bit. My colleagues Kimberly Cruzy, Kavish Karjai, and I weeks ago began gathering copies of bills from legislators around the country dealing with transgender focused legislation. And it quickly became clear that it was going to be a big job. So we narrowed our focus to bills focusing on gender affirming care. And it quickly became clear when we began comparing it to model legislation being offered by some groups that there was a lot of language that was identical or nearly identical in those bills to the model legislation we were looking at.
So Jeff, I really what are almost template. Can you give me a sense of who are the groups that are behind the writing of these template bills?
There are several groups that are putting forth model legislation and often have in the past on various topics. And this year on bills to restrict gender affirming care for minors, we focused on the groups, the Family Research Council, which is a well-known group that has fought in the past against things like abortion rights and LGBTQ rights. And we also looked at model legislation being offered by a fairly new group called Do No Harm.
So who's funding them? What are the goals of groups like Do No Harm?
Family Research Council's focus has long been on social issues, and they have close ties to the evangelical Christian community. And they are an older organization whose funding and various ties are already pretty well known. Do No Harm is a newer group that was incorporated in January 2022 by a former associate dean at the University of Pennsylvania Medical School. So there is some, at least a stamp of medical approval there based on the background of the founder. The funding of the organization remains unclear because it is so new. It hasn't yet had to file tax forms that would give a clearer picture of who's funding it. But we did find during our investigation that it had won a $250,000 award called the Gregor Peterson Prize, which has been awarded in the past to other groups that provide model legislation.
All right. So when you're talking about model legislation, and this differs from sort of laws that originate or legislation that originates with constituents in a particular state, for instance, you have to ask, what is the motivation? Is it about legislating, or is there some way in which the purpose of this is simply to get voters riled up?
Well, first, model legislation is not a new thing. It's been used in state houses for decades, and it's a common way of doing business and writing bills. However, the people we spoke with in this instance said it was troubling because the bills spread misinformation about gender affirming care based on distorted interpretations of science. And the people I spoke with seemed to indicate that that was problematic because it's an effort not only to get legislation passed, but it's being controlled essentially by a handful of interest groups. One person that I spoke with said the goal is not to improve the lives of Americans, but to gain access, power, and wealth.
We got time for one more. I guess I want to ask, are there other similar efforts that are mounted by groups on the left?
There certainly are, yeah. Model legislation is not only used by conservative or Republican groups. Democrats have used it previously too.
Jeff McMillan from the Associated Press, thank you for your time and sharing with us your work. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. And I hope that gives you a broad view as you see it from the secular press. I'm now going to ask Erica to come and to talk to us a little bit about, so what's the impact on the LGBTQ plus and transgender community? Erica?
Thank you, Donnie. And I have to answer that question just by repeating the title of this webinar. All of the trans folks that I know are terrified. They're terrified not only to come out and begin transition for fear of reprisal, bullying, or lack of access to care, but also those of us who have been out for years are now afraid, feeling like we have to keep secrets. When I asked my Facebook friends what the last few months have been like since we've seen the rise in the number of proposed laws like this. One woman told me that a constant state of panic makes it impossible for her to concentrate on her work or leisure activities. Someone else said that she feels the need to live stealth, which means to hide her gender status from everyone in her life because she fears for her health and her safety. She fears she will lose her job were her employers to find out. And then one trans man said that he's actively researching the requirements to move to Canada because he feels like he just cannot live a good life in the US, being who he is. Now, trans people of all ages are in danger because of these bills, but especially our youth. It's well documented that lack of access to medical care and social support correlates with exponentially higher rates of suicide than we see in the general population. And one survey from the Trevor Project shows that almost 9 in 10 trans and non-binary youth report worsening mental health as a result of the wave of anti-trans legislation across the country. But it's not just trans folks' mental and physical well-being that's on the line. It's our very safety. Because these bills legitimize discrimination, bigotry, and violence against not only trans folks, but queer people of all kinds. According to the FBI, nearly 1 in 5 of any type of hate crime is now motivated by anti-LGBTQ bias. Over the past decade, the HRC reports over 310 trans and gender non-conforming people who have lost their lives because of hate violence. And where 20% of these crimes happened, Texas and Florida are 2 of the first states that introduced bills of this kind and provided models for the rest of the states. Now, as we heard in that news clip, this rise in discriminatory legislation represents a coordinated effort by conservative political action groups across the country. And they often deploy lies about what gender-affirming medical care really means. But Donnie, I think you're going to help us get to the bottom of those myths, right?
Well, we're going to give a general introduction to that. Again, remember, I'm not a medical person, but do want to talk about this. In general, gender health support or care comes under 4 categories. We actually saw a slide that outlined some of this, and that is support, counseling, medical intervention, which can involve medicine or surgery. But let's talk and focus on what is gender-affirming health care for minors. First of all, the first thing to realize is not a lot. The first step is observation and support. What does the child want to do? I mean, do they, if it's somebody who was assigned male at birth, are they saying, I'd like to wear a dress to school every once in a while? Or I think I'm a girl. The response of the medical and mental health community is, in working with parents and so forth, is to say, let the child drive that bus. Don't encourage them in one way or the other way, let them drive the bus. Now, one of the responsibilities of supportive parents is to work with the environments that the young person is involved in. So that's school, social groups. I mean, one of the great things is there's not a lot happening, but the Girl Scout organization is doing some very creative things and trying some stuff. One of the places is in Texas, of all places, but there are other organizations that are working really hard at doing this. It is a team approach because you have to have all of these folks coming together. And wouldn't it be nice if one of the supports for this young person and their family were their church? You know, one of the great things a church can do? You can do a renaming ceremony for students. A lot of churches have done this. There are other things that you can do to support that church and that family, to help them understand that God loves them, because so many transgender people feel that they either have to be themselves or be a person of faith, but never both together. What an incredible shame. The second thing to realize is that mental health counseling is involved for both the young person and for their parents, because even supportive parents go through what I call collateral pain, because they've lost something. They anticipated a certain thing and now that's not going to happen. Doesn't mean they're not supportive of their child, but they have to be honest with their own emotions and feelings. And they need to work with a mental health professional who can help them be guided through those feelings and be able to honestly talk about what they're dealing with and what they're dealing with their social friends and the people at work and the comments that they're getting. The child may be a little protected. If it's a younger child, the parents may be the one who are getting a lot of the harassment. So there's that counseling. And then there are medical interventions. Now, generally speaking, for prepubescent children, there's no medical intervention at all. Just let's watch the child, make sure they've got the support, and let's keep an eye on what's going on. As they approach puberty, if things are still uncertain in terms of where to go, then there is the use of blockers. And these blockers simply do this. They forestall puberty. No harm, no foul. So a young person starts blockers. 4 years later, after a lot of counseling and stuff, they say, you know what? I really think I am the gender I was assigned at birth. Take the blockers away, puberty kicks in, no harm, no foul. If, though, after a period of time, that it becomes clear that this young person really is moving in, that they really are a gender that other than what they were assigned at birth, then there are medicines that can be used. There are hormones that can be introduced along with the blockers. Rarely, please understand this, rarely is there any serious surgery done on a person under 18 years of age. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that, because a lot of what ought to have happened is let the hormones work and let nature do as much as it can with those hormones. But rarely is there a lot of surgery done with young people. What you hear in the media a lot and people talking is that, oh, there's surgery going on all over the place. You get the idea that a 5-year-old comes and tells their mom or dad, I'm not who you thought I was. And 2 months later, surgery is being done. Nothing could be further from the truth. Please do not believe these lies. And let me just share with you, I won't read all of these organizations, but I have a list of over 30 organizations headed by the American Medical Association, all kinds of associations that have to do with psychotherapy and social workers, all of whom in their official stands as professional medical and mental health providers affirm gender-affirming care for minors. It is the standard. When someone comes out as a doctor or another mental health professional and they offer something else, they are swimming upstream. They are going against the overwhelming majority and recognized health and mental health care professionals in this country. Please, please, please be aware of that. Now we're at a time here where what we really want to do is answer some of your questions. We've given you a very quick overview, but we know you've got some questions and we know some of this may involve your ministries. And so those questions can come in the Q&A, I guess, and or you can put them in the chat. But Kurt, will you and Brian help us know what the questions are?
Absolutely.
Just a word of warning. I mean, we're both preachers. I mean, if you don't have questions, we can talk anyway.
So here is one question. Also wanted to note, this person says, I'm in my 30s and on Medicare due to being disabled. So what affects Medicare affects folks of all ages too. Thank you for doing this tonight.
Yes, and thank you. I know I overgeneralize, but that person is absolutely right. There are other people besides old people like me, and it does affect everyone. And by the way, I was 69 when I came out of the closet, okay? So I've been on Medicare for 4 years. So just saying. Brian, any other questions for us tonight?
Sure. Here's one. Children's Sunday school teacher here, 1st through 5th grade. We pretty much encourage all of our kids to love all humans. Is there anything special we can do for cis kids to help them be knowledgeable, aware, inclusive, etc., of their trans friends, peers?
Erica?
Yeah, thank you for that important question. I think the most basic and one of the most powerful things we as faith educators can provide our children is an education about what gender really is and how folks aren't bound to this arbitrary set of societally generated rules about what being a man or a woman, boy or girl means. And every single one of those children will find a way that they don't fit the most accepted definition of what boy means or girl means. Perhaps they don't really identify with either. And this will help build empathy towards their trans peers. And it will hopefully form the kind of Christians, the kind of people who don't foster this kind of discrimination in their hearts over their lives.
Hey, Brian, let's go to the next question.
If a small church only has capacity to prioritize one trans-related ministry, would you suggest it be focused on educating adults or reaching out to serve trans youth themselves?
Erica's going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute. I would just say this. Please, please, please don't reach out until you're ready. You need to be ready to welcome trans and non-binary folks into your community. And that does take some preparation. And so I would say first, get the preparation and then do that. But Erica's going to talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. So let's go on to the next question.
Will this program be part of an ongoing educational process?
Meaning this webinar series?
Yes.
We hope so.
Good. A couple of questions about books, and this may come later too. Do you have some books you recommend on this topic? Thank you both for doing this. Another question along the lines of books is, what is a good children's book about gender?
Erica?
Yeah, I don't have a list in front of me, but a good one that comes to mind is called I Am Jazz. It was written by a young trans teen, partially about her experience as a child coming to awareness of her gender. And it really puts things in perspective in a really accessible way.
The book I would recommend, especially for younger children, and I don't have the title, Brian, perhaps we have the email addresses of everyone. We could send out a few resources in the next couple of days, but it is a book about crayons, and the characters are crayons. And it's a marvelous book for young children. When I came out, two of my grandchildren were 5. These books were incredibly helpful. They're now 10, and the three of us get in trouble together all the time. But this book about crayons would be a great one, and we'll get the title of it and get it out to folks.
Here's another question. Our faith community has recently become an affirming congregation. Yay. But I feel that we are not really building an inclusive community. We are mostly white, cisgendered congregation who think that they are affirming. What are practical things we can be doing that will help gender non-conforming trans folks believe we are serious about being welcoming?
Now, you want to give a little preview of what you're going to talk about in a minute, Erica?
Yeah. So I am going to give a list here in a few moments, but I think one of the most powerful and visible things that a congregation can do is to talk about trans issues explicitly, to say the word trans and not subsume it under LGBTQ and the whole long acronym, and to say it regularly, to pray for us, to have it be an issue that folks can see you are grappling with. Trans folks know that no community of majority straight or cis people is going to be perfect, but I think I can speak for most of us when I say that if I see a community honestly taking on this issue, recognizing that it's important and trying to be there for me, well, that's a community that I would like to be a part of.
The other thing I would suggest quickly, and this is really an easy one, put trans folks in places of visibility. For example, being an usher. You don't have to go to seminary to be an usher, okay? But if you are a trans person in a congregation and you see trans folks coming down, taking communion, taking an offering, if they're qualified, make sure they're part of the leadership team. And our church, we have queer people doing everything. They even have me as their pastor. So those putting people out front so people see that they're there. I'm not talking about putting people who are not ready, but almost everybody's ready to be an usher. So put them out there. Let people see, let them feel, and let people see that they're part of this community. Brian?
How young is too young? Meaning, when do these conversations with youth begin? You do this in Sunday school classes without parents' permission? I admit this is probably a generational question on my part.
Erica, you want to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think there will be a natural time where these conversations will come up. As we saw in the video, it's a topic of national news. More and more, over 50% of Gen Z and Gen Alpha report identifying as some kind of queer. Children are going to know a trans or non-binary person from their classes or from their friend groups, or they're going to have questions and feelings about themselves that they don't understand. And they may feel that a Sunday school class is just a safe enough space where they can bring this up. And as for parents being involved, I mean, I think that can be part of the role of the church in the Sunday school class or the youth minister to help affirm the child, tell them that they are good and beloved, and then help facilitate conversations with family when the child is ready.
Yeah, and I would just say, unless these children are living in a bubble, it's not going to be unusual for 5 or 6-year-olds to have friends or come in contact with young people who are identifying as trans or non-binary. It's all around us. And like I said, I mean, if people put their kids in a bubble, maybe it's going to be forestalled, but they're going to find these children. Better we talk to them ahead of time. Now, I would agree with Erica. We want to be talking to parents. I don't think we want to make parents feel like we're trying to pull something over on them. But golly, you know, we all say everyone's welcome here. Well, let's talk about what it means for everybody to be welcome here.
what are, and we may touch upon this some more yet, Erica, but what resources are there for congregations to educate? This is kind of a similar question that we've had asked in different ways, but I think it gets at perhaps some more broad resources.
Erica?
Yeah, I know AWAB maintains a list of tools and resources that we can connect our partner congregations with, but I am reminded in this moment of the Trans Faith in Action Network, or Trans Faith, that has a web presence with a bunch of educational materials, list of things that are appropriate for children, stuff on a more adult level, spanning a host of different religious traditions. Gosh, and there's so many great things on YouTube that is just out there for free. It just takes a little bit of Googling.
Yeah, and I don't want to steal any of Erica's thunder, but I would just say, although we're dealing with primarily a Baptist audience tonight, let's just realize every mainline Protestant tradition has a group like Welcoming and Affirming. They call it little different things in every denomination, we're all different. But I would look around my area, and if there's another church hanging a flag, or you hear that they're welcoming, make some friends. You can do this on an ecumenical basis. It could have a great impact. Brian, I think that, yeah, we have time for a couple more questions if we've got them.
Just in the spirit of resources, there have been some that some folk have suggested. One person suggested that folk watch the program with Jon Stewart that happened on October 7th, 2022. They found that to be a very helpful presentation on gender-affirming care. Someone else has said that they believe, Donnie, earlier you may have been referring to the children's book Red, a Crayon Story. They found that to be a great...
That is it. Yes, that's it.
Yep. And then someone else said another great children's book is It Feels Good to Be Yourself, a book about gender identity. Right. And in the spirit of affirmation, one person is with us tonight who says, I'm loving this session. I'm also a pediatric nurse, so this is wonderful.
That's great. Other questions, Brian?
Those are the ones that we have for now.
Okay, so then what we're going to do is this will give Erica and I a minute or two extra for our last parts that we were really going to try and jam together. So Erica, why don't you start sharing with us some things churches can do?
Yeah. So there are a lot of things that churches can do to help not only trans youth and their families, but everyone in the pews to grow in their journey of becoming more Christ-like and showing the love of God to everyone that walks through the doors. And the way that I would describe that generally is to listen with openness to trans folks when we talk about our suffering and what we need. Resist cooperation with the structures that cause our hardship and suffering. And insist on our rights, the rights of everyone, to those with power. Each and every one of you has come to this webinar tonight. Thank you for your allyship. And I know this is a huge topic that we've only scratched the surface of, but now you've learned something that you can share with others. Bring this back to your congregation and help educate others. You might speak in worship, or start a small group, or teach a Sunday school class, or submit a prayer for trans folks in the prayers of the people, or even just in one of those parking lot conversations that I know us Baptists love. Beyond that, we can also write to our elected officials to oppose any of these bills that are being debated in state houses, or show up to protests for equitable access to medical care, or that opposes discriminatory legislation. Almost every one of us live in a state that is considering or has considered one of these bills. And a supportive witness from a community of faith goes a long way to countering this deceitful narratives that PACs have put out around the country. A church can also reach out to their local LGBTQ community center. They are probably most likely going to have a support group for trans folks. Perhaps you can offer your church building as a discrete place to meet, or offer other kind of support. You could even incorporate them regularly into your mission budget, or another larger national group led by trans folks, like the Sylvia Rivera Law Project, that helps provide legal representation to trans folks in need, or the Trans Lifeline, that provides a free 24-hour hotline as a source of support for those contemplating self-harm. Lastly, if you know a trans person, hold our stories in your heart. Create the space for them to feel safe sharing with you, and then share your vulnerability with them too. This is the way that we all show up for each other's healing and liberation. And as Donnie said earlier, don't just welcome them in the door and save a seat for them on the back pew. Invite them to give testimony in worship, or something smaller but still visible, like taking up an offering. Or, you know, if this person is really, really involved, they can even be on the church council. Imagine that. There are so many creative ways that each and every one of you can respond to this need in your community. And I know that AOAB is here to help you. So if you have a question or an idea that we couldn't talk about tonight, please do reach out to Brian or to me or to Donnie, and I know each of us would be more than happy to talk it out with you and connect you to any resources that you may need.
Thanks, Erica. Really appreciate that. And I just want to say amen to all of those things. Those are great ideas. But my folks, let's be real for a minute here. When you as a church say to trans folks and non-binary folks that you want to help, many of them will withdraw. They do not trust the church. In my opinion, the church is the single most oppressive force against LGBTQ plus people, and especially trans folks, in the entire country. And many, many people find it hard. I had one young person last summer send me an email and said, I'm not trying to be a wise guy or anything, but how is it possible that you are a transgender woman and a minister? And we had coffee together. And it was an honest question. Everything this person knew about the church was anti-LGBTQ plus. They weren't trying to be a wise guy or anything. They were just asking an honest question. And it opened the door to share that God's love is much greater than a lot of people think it is. In fact, I'll be honest with you, in the last 5 years, I've had more opportunities to witness to my faith in Jesus Christ than I had in the 69 years before that. That is an honest reality. People open up and ask great questions. This has been a hard hour. It's been hard for me. I'm sure it's been hard for Erica as well, because we're talking out of our lived experience. Every one of the things we've talked about, a person flashes in our mind, a young person that we've dealt with, parents that we've met with who are saying, my child just told me, and how do I support them? What do I do? How do I go through this? This is very real for us. You heard the statistics on suicide. They're just outrageous. It's epidemic. And this is about life and death. I remember talking to the head of a hospital several years ago about transgender issues, and she looked at me and said, stop. This is about life and death, period. That's what this is about. I want to finish on a positive word. Erica alluded to this. I want to just reinforce it. And that is this, that just as much as this legislation hurts young people, when people come out and support young people, it has the opposite effect and mitigates some of that work that those people are doing. We have the opportunity to do that. My friends, Jesus said in Matthew's gospel that the church was a great thing and that the gates of hell would not prevail against the church. We can stop being the oppressive church and be the liberating church for all people that the Gospels talk about. And I want to encourage you tonight to be a force for the church being what I believe God has called the church to be through countless generations, open to all, welcoming to all. And let me finish with a hymn that was a very significant part of my youth, but that has become incredibly significant to me in this time of my life. This one verse. Just as I am, though tossed about, with many a conflict and many a doubt, fighting and fears within, without, O Lamb of God, I come. Just as I am, I come. Just as I am, I come. Brian?
Reverend Anderson and Reverend Saunders, thank you so much for speaking to us tonight from your place in life and in ministry. You have enriched us tremendously. We affirm you and the work that you continue to do. Again, on behalf of the AWAB board and our staff, I want to thank all of you for participating this evening. Some of you have inquired as to whether or not this webinar will be available after this evening. And yes, it will. It'll take a little bit of time for things to be set up, but we hope within a couple of hours for the webinar to be on the AWAB website. If you have not visited the website in its entirety, I'll encourage you to do so, awab.org. There you'll be able to find this webinar as a resource along with our resource library. I'll also encourage you to be looking at and for our newsletters. If you have not signed up for a newsletter, please do so. It is wonderful to be able to connect through this technology as we have. And so again, thank you to Kurt Kaufman for doing the behind the scenes work to make this possible. And thank you to each of you. I often like to say that there is far more we can do together than any of us can do on our own. So as Baptists, as children of God, together, may we continue to do what we can to share a love that knows no bounds and that can embrace all of us just as we are. Thank you, and please be safe, and we will connect again with you soon.